Hey everybody, it's Joe from greenlightsound.com, and today we've got a look at a relatively new EQ plugin called the Kirchhoff-EQ. And in the title, I said, the new king of digital EQ, because this has so many features. It's feature rich. It's got 15 different filter types. It's got 30 vintage modeled EQ filters, just the curves, not the actual saturation or circuit modeling, but the curves of vintage units. It's got deep dynamic EQ options and a ton of other features. Some really important things on EQ. It doesn't have any high frequency cramping, and it's got extremely low noise as well. One of the lowest noise floors of any EQ I've ever used, analog or digital modeled EQ. If we jump over to PluginDoctor, you'll see what I mean about the cramping. If I have this bell filter set, it's about 500 hertz now, and I slide it up, you'll see on PluginDoctor as I get near Nyquist frequency, there's no cramping at all. Maintains its shape throughout. Nice symmetrical shape throughout. So just for comparison, I've got the AMEC EQ here from Brainworks and Plugin Alliance. I set the filter shape to be very similar to the Kirchhoff. And you can see as I slide the frequency higher and higher, you see cramping as we get closer to Nyquist. The bell starts to lose its shape and gets squashed in there. That's EQ cramping, and we don't have any of that on the Kirchhoff, which is fantastic. And if we jump over to our harmonic analysis in PluginDoctor, you can see that there is no noise going on at all. The noise floor is extremely low. It's got a bunch of different phase modes here: minimum phase, analog phase, mix phase, and linear phase, of course. Mix phase is really unique. If I jump back to PluginDoctor again and look at the phase response of this analysis, you're going to see that phase shift that typically happens with filtering, and that tracks up and down as we go. So if we get close to the top end, it stays the same. You can see that phase shift. If we change this to mix, what's going to happen is you have zero latency phase on the low end, and then a smooth transition to linear phase on the top end, because a lot of engineers want to use that linear phase for the upper frequencies. And as I move this filter up, you can see that phase response smooth out and go fully linear phase. And there's a smooth transition between the two. It's a really unique mode for this EQ. We've got spectrum grab built in with this hand, so if I play some audio, I can grab peaks easily and pull them down. We've got a fully featured dynamic section that's accessed by hitting this D button right here, and we've got upward or downward compression and expansion, so lots of different dynamic options, a lot more than most dynamic EQs have. We've got, of course, mid-side, left-right processing, a ton of user customizable settings, which we'll look into later. But I want to really get started by looking at the different filter types available. So we've got our standard digital filters here: the bell, low shelf, high pass, high shelf, low pass, notch filter, band pass, tilt shelf, and a flat tilt, flat top, which is unique. Some don't have this, where we can really shape that out to have that flat top of the filter. We've got this unique sword shape, which is great for cutting out resonances really tightly, notching out certain frequencies within a signal. We've got a few miscellaneous shapes down here, but these are the vintage style EQ. The first one, type E, should be pretty self-explanatory for those familiar with analog style EQ. That is the SSL-E series style. And it follows the shape again, not any noise or modeled saturation, but just the EQ curves. We've got our type G from SSL, Neve style, and again, the interface changes to kind of look like the Neve hardware. Vintage tube, my guess is this is a Pultec style. Yep, looks like it, with that big low shelf. And we can even change that shape and get that little dip we can get on Pultecs, which is really nice. I'll just jump back to a typical bell for the rest of the explanation here of the controls. On this side, we've got our dynamic section. And on either side of our threshold, we've got different settings here. This side controls what happens when the signal goes above the threshold. You can choose the range, either upwards or downward range, and the ratio. This side controls what happens when the signal is below the threshold. Again, range controls, ratio controls. You can really dial in a solid frequency band here by squishing above and below, or expanding if you want to, and doing really whatever you want with your dynamic shaping here. We've got typical attack and release controls as well. The detect and relative settings are a little bit confusing. This is what's actually triggering the dynamic section here. What the threshold is measuring. The detect will measure the frequency you've selected and its Q value. So it's only listening for the signal within what you did right here. Whereas the relative detects the entire audio signal, and it kind of balances out between those two depending on what you have this slider set at. If you want to change what's actually triggering the detection for the dynamic section, you can click free here and slide these guys to wherever you want them, have them be as wide or as narrow as you want them to be. And again, that's the signal being measured to detect the dynamic section here. We can actually solo up whatever signal we're listening for here. We can use an external sidechain if we want. This is really useful if you're having, say, a kick trigger a bass track and having it duck out the bottom end of the bass every time the kick hits. The onset slider right here, if you set this all the way to 100%, it works on transients only, kind of like a transient shaper, and you can blend down more and more of the signal past the transient as you pull it down here. The relative slider here, when you set this all the way to 100%, the dynamic detection is taken only from the relative range. The whole signal, for example, is the default setting. When you slide this down to 0%, the dynamic detection is only taken from the frequency and bandwidth of the specific band you're listening for. Default setting is somewhere blended in between those two. So this controls exactly what's triggering the threshold for your dynamic section on the EQ. So a ton of really deep features here. Some of the other kind of miscellaneous buttons here. We have an A/B compare button. We can open up a keyboard and select specific frequencies and even double click and create a band on the frequency we selected. A bypass button up here, a polarity switch. This is the auto gain function. The scale is great for dialing back or up the EQ moves we've done already. So if I do a few different moves and select them all, we can control them all together. Here we can control the analyzer settings for what's happening in the FFT analyzer in the background. We've got full screen mode all the way on the right. We've got a pan ring and an output knob right down here. On the bottom bar, we can monitor the left, right, mid, or side signal alone. We've got look ahead that we can turn on. That's great for detecting transients a little bit better in the dynamic section. And a width slider here, which controls the kind of blend of the mid and side signal. Of course, we can resize not just full screen, but whatever size we want to go to. Now, one of the things that annoyed me when I first tried the plugin was that the EQ filter types weren't defaulting to what I like. So if I'm pulling down here, I kind of want to have that be a high pass filter. And it defaulted to a bell, and I thought, well, that's not great. One of the great things about this EQ, if we go into the settings now, is we can choose the default type for wherever we click within our frequency range. So if I want the lower frequency default type to change, I go to here, I click high pass, close that up, and then all of a sudden now it's a high pass filter, and it tells me exactly what I need. And you can see it's labeled now high pass until I get to the point where it changes to a bell. And I can change that exact setting to where that changes to a bell filter or a shelf if I want it there versus a high pass. So you can choose to have whatever type of filter you want be the default for whatever frequency you choose within the plugin. Really flexible in that way. We've got a ton of other settings we can go through there as well. We can change a lot about our user interface. We could even change themes here. It's on default theme now. I could go to classic theme where it changes the look completely. I could go to a grayscale theme. Just stick with the classic for now, but very deep in terms of customization. The couple small issues I have with the plugin are the actual text size is small, even when you go full screen. So if I take the plugin and I blow it up to full screen and I'm working with a band, the text still stayed really, really small. So that can be an issue for some users. I've got a really large display. It doesn't really bother me that much, but I could see how for some people that tiny print could be an issue. The second thing that's a little bit troublesome is when we're going with some of these vintage style filters. So some of these vintage style filters don't have controls that make sense all the time. So for example, if I have my Neve style here and I'm on the bell section of the Neve, I can sweep around, which is great. It's not fixed frequencies, but once I get below where the Neve actually had its frequency base, I'm moving this, but I'm not changing anything. So that should kind of be turned off. I would like it better if this was the bottom of the travel of the knob was set to where we don't affect the signal anymore, or if there was a hard stop there or something like that. The other thing is some of these, for example, the slope here has no effect on this band on the Neve. So this should be kind of hidden within the GUI, I think. You might be using this thinking you're doing something, you're not actually doing anything to the signal. So hiding some of those controls would be great. But those are two really minor issues compared to the overall full feature set of this plugin. Another thing that's great about this is the developer seems to be listening to a lot of user input and implementing fixes really quickly. So if we have a lot of issues with the plugin, it's probably going to be updated sometime soon to control some of those issues. So the important thing is, how does it sound? And one of the things I found with this plugin is the high end especially is super clean. We're going to go to a vocal here. And on the vocal, I have two plugins doing the exact same thing. I've got the stock EQ from PreSonus Studio One, the Pro EQ 2, with an 8 dB boost at 5K on a high shelf with a 12 dB per octave slope. I've got the same exact thing going on with the Kirchhoff-EQ. They sound different. I'm going to bypass the Kirchhoff and put the Pro EQ on first. To my ears, when I compare the two, the stock EQ is pretty harsh in the high end. The Kirchhoff is very smooth while maintaining still that high end boost. So I'm going to bypass them both first. Here's what the raw signal sounds like.
All you ever tried to do was bring me down, so I turned around and then you shot me in the back.
The Pro EQ.
All you ever tried to do was bring me down, so I turned around and then you shot me in the back.
And the Kirchhoff.
All you ever tried to do was bring me down, so I turned around and then you shot me in the back.
It's just so much smoother than the Pro EQ, and that top end, it's amazing. So I'll go between them kind of quickly here, stack them on top of one and the other.
All you ever tried to do was bring me down, so I turned around and then you shot me in the back.
Just the sibilants up here are so much harsher than in the Kirchhoff, so you get that top end boost with a lot of smoothness to it. Now, I'm admittedly not an EQ expert as to what's going on behind the scenes that makes this work. I've seen a lot explained about why Kirchhoff can do this so well, but it is an extremely clean and transparent sounding EQ. You may think they're two digital EQs, who cares, they're the same exact thing. They are not. The Kirchhoff is certainly cleaner and great at that boost. In fact, I can boost it a lot more and not get too harsh.
All you ever tried to do was bring me down, so I turned around and then
Versus
you
nothing.
shot me in the back, saying, ooh, if I could have told you.
Now, if I do a 10 dB boost with the Pro EQ here, you're going to hear that harshness.
All you ever tried to do was bring me down, so.
And here's that same 10 dB boost with the Kirchhoff.
All you ever tried to do was bring me down, so I turned around and then you shot me in the back.
I mean, I got to boost it a ton just to get any harshness out of it. It's a great top end sound. If I wanted to EQ the whole vocal, I could easily do that.
All you ever tried to do was bring me down, so I turned around and then you shot me in the back, saying, ooh, if I could have told you that I'm not afraid of anything you do, 'cause I'm bulletproof.
And if I wanted to, I could put the dynamic mode on. I could de-ess the vocal within this same plugin here. Just a fantastic sounding, easy to use plugin that has a lot of features that a lot of different EQ plugins may have, all in one single tool. So I am really, really highly impressed by this. One of the best new plugins I've seen in a long time, and possibly my new go-to digital EQ. It's that good, especially in the top end for vocals. Awesome. So highly recommended. Demo it, check it out. Links are down in the description below. If you have any questions or comments, let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, so we can keep you in the loop as to what's coming up next, and I'll see you in the next one.